Hey, how you doing? Thanks for watching Hobsquatch. Reuse your 7-Eleven and fast food cups and being poor will sting a little less. Same works for plates if you eat out of your shoes. What up? It's Logan. Thanks for coming back to Hobsquatch. Fourth video here, and this one's gonna be a little bit bigger when we're talking about core mechanics of my game. The last video that I put out, I was talking about the dice themselves and how they worked in the game. But now we're going to be getting into the attributes that your character is going to have. Now, in most games, you'll have attributes that are pretty common, which is okay because it works well. You'll have, let's see, just a spitball, you'd have dexterity, strength, constitution, wisdom, willpower, things like that. And not that those things aren't included in the game that I'm doing, but one of the things that is going to be implemented that kind of condenses it and expands it at the same time is I'm going to use a different system that I don't really have a name for yet. But basically what it's going to do is you're going to have 3 main attributes and multiple secondary attributes that are tied to it. So for the attributes that I have set already, the 3 main ones, you're going to have brain, brawn, and soul. Now, this is going to cut back to Fable and the Kingdoms of Amalur game, because in Fable you would have strength, skill, and will. This is basically raw strength, skill in either ranged or speed in your hand-to-hand combat or your sneakiness, and will, which is just your magical prowess. In Kingdoms of Amalur, you had might, finesse, and sorcery. And it kind of translated to the same thing, but the way that you put points into those 3 things worked a little differently. But the one thing they had in common was a classless system, and that's something that I like a lot. That's something that I want to implement into pen and paper, and I was trying to devise a way to do this, and that seemed to be somewhat of a hurdle. Now, the way I came across this hurdle is I said, okay, make it simple, stupid. So I went in and I took 3 basic attributes, and I said, okay, I'm going to name them brain, brawn, and soul, right? Makes sense to me. So I put those on the little Google Doc I have that I'm making this RPG on. And I decided, okay, now I'm going to take these secondary attributes, things that are akin to almost any RPG, and I'm going to put those where I feel like they place on those 3 main attributes. So under brawn, I have strength, vitality, and combat mastery. Now, those 3 attributes will mean different things, but they all attribute themselves to raw power in a lot of ways. Strength is going to be basically your raw damage in melee combat and your physical capabilities doing anything that requires your muscles. Vitality is going to be like your constitution. So the way that this could be different is when you put points into those different secondary attributes. When you have strength, okay, yeah, your guy's big, dumb, and strong, and that's cool, but you have no points in vitality. Okay, he can lift a very heavy thing, but how long can he hold that very heavy thing? Which is going to be like your endurance, or for what I have right now, fatigue. I'm thinking about changing that. But that's the basics of how that would work just for brawn itself. Combat mastery, I think I want to implement combat maneuvers and things that your character can learn in combat, because there's a lot of things that a lot of RPGs have that add spice to combat. Just like the fighter in D&D, later levels, you get these cool little things you can do with these, I don't remember what they call them, but they're just dice, and you can use those or expend them to do cool combat maneuvers in game. And I believe it was the fighter anyway. But I want something that's kind of like that, but instead of expending dice, you'd have like an actual stamina system. And I think it would be cool to have a meter that could be depleted, like the sorcerer would have, or the wizard, or the mage, or whatever it may be. That being said, you also have brain and sorcery. Now, with brain, you're going to have finesse, knowledge, perception, and there's a fourth one in there. But anyway, it's kind of going to work the same way. Perception is going to be basically your raw damage and ranged combat, which is kind of going to offset your strength versus precision. And then you're going to have your finesse, which is going to be like your sneakiness, your deftness with your hands. Subterfuge is another one that I wanted to put in there because I feel like subterfuge, and I'm including like bombs and grenades, things like that, and subterfuge, even if it's not always deceiving. I just think it fits there pretty well. So with those things like the poisons, the bombs, the demolition, or the deceiving nature, it's not just those things. It can be tricking your opponents anyway. Those are going to be the things that are in brain. Now, there's different ways to think about how your character would act when it comes to raw power and his knowledge. And I think the third thing that comes into play when people think about it is like their second nature, which would be their instinct. So I did want to implement something like that. To me, it doesn't fit in brawn or brain. It fits in soul. Soul, I have arcane, I have instinct, and I have bond. So now I'm having something to me that feels a little different because normally you'd see like, the dashing rogue in a lot of games. They have like a high charisma, a high dex. And that makes sense to me. It certainly would make a good rogue. But in this game, you have what is assumed to be the magic user. One of his secondary attributes is bond, and that's going to be like your charisma score. Now, that is just kind of tied into the way that I worded the whole system out because it's part of the soul. It's not always necessarily your brains that get you through talking. It's not always necessarily your physical intimidation that gets you through your situations. Sometimes it's just your natural ability to speak with people, and I think that's part of one's soul. So with that being said, that's why that fits there. And another thing I have there is instinct. This is your character's second nature, things that come to them without thinking with their brain. It might be something that they learned with knowledge so many years ago, but it's something that's been ingrained into their brains for so long now that it's just become something it's so fast in their heads. They're just on it. Every time that they do this certain thing, they just know how to do it. And things like that. I put tracking in there. I think you could argue that could go into one of the brain categories, but I also think that there's a certain level of instinct when it comes to tracking or investigation. Sleuth is one of them that I used, and I think that fits really well in instinct. But that's just a couple of the things that goes in there. But with that, those main attributes and those secondary attributes, you cover all of the bases with what an attribute is supposed to be in any RPG, but you also have skills or proficiencies or whatever you want to call them, in my case, capabilities, that are tied to those attributes. And when you tie those to attributes, I feel like most commonly you're going to see them like in parentheses next to an attribute, which is actually really cool. Fantasy Age did it. I think Dungeons and Dragons works out a way like that. The way that I put it is the skills that are tied to these secondary attributes are going to be things that your character is naturally going to be better at the more points he has in this thing. He or she, I'm sorry. And so you're going to have, say, I haven't worked out whether it's going to be a point system, a star system. I think we'll just say points for now because anything you use can just be turned into a number. But let's say you have 1 point in strength. Things that are tied to strength is might, which is like your raw physical strength. Try to move a boulder, whatever. You've got jumping, which is the strength in your legs. You have a couple other things that I can't remember off of the top of my head. But let's say strength and jumping, for instance. If you put 1 point into strength, might and jumping. If you put 1 point into strength, anything that you try to do to show your strength, like might, or jumping really high, those things are naturally going to be better. So instead of taking your character and making him good at pushing boulders around, but not so good at jumping or doing another thing that a strong person should be able to do, they're naturally going to get better at these things if they improve their strength. Now, that's also going to work the same way for if your guy's a lightweight drinker and you want to maybe put 1 point in vitality. He's going to be able to drink a little bit more before getting completely conked out. And I think that's a good way to implement the way that the skills work with the secondary abilities and the main attributes. And so far, that's what I have. I haven't worked out a way to roll for it yet. That's going to be the next thing that I work on. I also want to implement possibly a point-buy system that you could use in the game, because I know a lot of RPGs do that, and it's very effective if people like to use it. And I think the thing that I would want to do, I've always liked rolling, so I'm going to have to come up with a roll table. What I did for the Legend of Zelda RPG was you were allowed to take 4 d4s, and you were allowed to roll them, and you would burn your lowest die, and you'd take the 3 that you had, and you would, put those towards whatever attribute scores are going to be. Thank you guys, Scott, for giving me that idea, because I feel like that's an idea that a lot of people share, but I just was blind to. But that's what I have so far for the main attributes, secondary attributes, and capabilities. Those are going to be the names that I put into the game for what they're going to be able to do. But as always, thanks for watching Hobsquatch. Thanks for being here on my 4th video. I'm very excited about how you guys have been responding to the content. Please like and subscribe. I'm begging you. I need to feed my family. Please stay tuned for more. I'm going to try to put out content as regularly as I can. And like I said, thank you. If you liked the video, be sure to give it a like and subscribe. Thank you for watching.